Good afternoon again. This is a follow-up to the previous video that we showed on demand curves sloping downwards. And one of the things we suggested there is you might be willing to pay a certain amount for a good, but the competitive free market actually ensures in most cases you don't have to pay what you would be willing to pay. And so our previous example, we had the idea of pizza, and you might have been willing to pay up to $5 per slice for the first slice. But when you go into a store, you might find that it only sells for $3.50. And so you would get a gain over what you would be willing to pay of $1.50 for that slice of pizza. And now I want to take that illustration just a little bit more abstractly, more generally, with this diagram. If we have any downward sloping demand curve, and when we introduce supply in the next chapter, you're going to see how we achieve this equilibrium. But for now, let's just assume that we don't have to pay but this price equilibrium here for any amount that we want to buy, that it's a competitive market. We can, for instance, you can go into the grocery store or the convenience store and you can pay $1.75 for as many Coca-Colas as you want, regardless of what the personal benefit to you might be for that item. And so what we find here is each incremental quantity that we consume, we would be willing to pay less and less. That's why we have, as we talked last time, with our downward sloping demand curve, because the incremental gain to our utility is getting smaller because we're applying our limited resources against less urgent needs first. And then it comes at an increasing opportunity cost, as we said, because of additional items that we could have consumed of something else. But that means that everywhere on that demand curve, that was the maximum we were willing to pay. But the competitive market process ensures that we can buy all we want at this equilibrium price, such that at any particular quantity that we consume, there's a gap between what we would be willing to pay and what we have to pay. And that's the consumer share of the gains from trade. We've talked about the gains from trade earlier because of the differences in valuations. We're going to see later that the producer has an analogous producer's surplus, but this consumer surplus is the entire area under the curve, under the demand curve, but above the equilibrium price. And it all stems from the fact that we would be willing to pay more than the competitive market process forces us to do, such that we get a welfare gain because of trade. And we see that every trade, as we learned earlier in the book, increases value, and that will continue as long as the incremental gain to our utility is greater than what we could have alternatively purchased with a price. Beyond, if we were to go down here, what we would see is the equilibrium price would have been above what it meant to us, such that we would have actually had to sacrifice a higher level of utility that we could have consumed in some other good. So we won't go there. We will consume up to that equilibrium point, because as long as the demand curve is above the equilibrium price, we are getting more benefit than we actually have to sacrifice in terms of the foregone opportunities that our money could have purchased. We call this term the consumer surplus, and it's the consumer share of the gains from trade.